Today is the anniversary of Hurricane Maria, and this is no joke. So let's do this. Now, you know, a lot of people have been talking about Puerto Rico, and this for good reason, because Puerto Rico is still in shambles and it needs a lot of assistance if it's going to get in a position where it can actually sustain itself and be an environment for people to live in, a better environment, all right? So we know that they were dramatically hit with a couple hurricanes last year. Maria was one of them, and today is the anniversary of that. So I think it's important for us to take a little bit of time to kind of think about what happened in Puerto Rico and kind of see what politics has done or fails to do when it comes to the island of Puerto Rico. So 1 year ago, Hurricane Maria smashed directly into Puerto Rico as a Category 4 storm near its peak intensity. With the fuller picture we now have of the humanitarian crisis that followed, it's clear that few weather events have done as much damage. Though the island has received more than $25 billion in aid and gradually rebuilding, the initial response stands as a stark example of faltering and poor coordination among federal and local officials. So $25 billion has been poured into Puerto Rico, but part of the problem is a lack of communication between the federal and the local officials in order to best use the money, in order to get things done that will actually change lives and save lives in Puerto Rico. President Donald Trump to consider, because of the failure of the highest levels of government, all the way up to President Donald Trump, to consider the severity of the looming crisis before the storm hit and to take critical steps to mitigate it. The disaster was far worse than it had to be. Officials are looking at this and they're in retrospect saying, you know, if we'd have done things differently, there would be different outcomes. Kind of strange how that happens. Like, you look back and say, yeah, I guess if we did something different, maybe something different would have happened. That's not rocket science. You know, while Donald Trump is saying that we did a fantastic job in Puerto Rico, I think most of the people in Puerto Rico really appreciate what we've done. A recent Washington Post / Kaiser Family Foundation poll found that 8 in 10 residents there give negative marks to Trump. 7 in 10 give negative marks to the Puerto Rican government. So all in all, the inhabitants of Puerto Rico, the citizens that live in Puerto Rico, the U.S. citizens that live in Puerto Rico, should I say, they dislike Trump almost as much as they dislike the efforts that their own government gave in trying to help them. So it's not just Trump. The way that they're reporting it, depending on what news agency you watch, you know, the ones that particularly focus on smashing and bashing Trump, they would never report that the people were unhappy with the way that Puerto Rico has handled it, the government itself of Puerto Rico has handled this issue, or handled the hurricanes, or been responding to the hurricanes. They would focus just on the Trump part. And the people that are here to support Donald Trump, the media that plays the role of Trump's a good guy and he's so misunderstood, well, those guys would only point to what the government agencies in Puerto Rico did and not so much on what Trump did, unless they were giving it glowing praise. That's why I tell people, man, when you disagree with someone, you can't seem to come to an agreement when it comes to politics, stop everything and just ask them, hey, what channels, what type of media do you watch? And that'll tell you everything you need to know, because it's the media that puts these thoughts into people's heads. This is typically where people get their information. So anyway, it goes on. The island's infrastructure was weak and vulnerable to storms well before Maria. But the government's efforts to respond were slow, insufficient, and lacking transparency. Patchy electricity and cell service plagued the island for months. Remote rural villages were completely cut off from all services after the single roads to them were mangled by the storm. So we got people who were unable to get to main roads because of blockages on those roads. And we're talking all types of pieces of land, probably debris and what have you, making transportation almost impossible. The death toll from the storm at first appeared to journalists to be in the hundreds, though not to officials who insisted it was at the most 64. So it was also, just to recap, guys, so people know, it wasn't just Trump giving this low number. The government of Puerto Rico was giving the low number of 64. Journalists on the ground were saying that it had to be in the hundreds, but that's not what was being reported officially from the Puerto Rican government. See how things come out more and more as we take time and look at them, as they make way out of the news cycle? Huh? Now, if you watch this channel, you know I told you about that. Like, When we first started covering Puerto Rico again in the aftermath of the comments that Donald Trump made about how great it was, everyone was on pins and needles about Florence coming, making landfall here in the United States on the East Coast. They started talking about Puerto Rico again. And during that conversation, guys, I was telling you, hey, the number was at like 17 and 64, and then it kept climbing, but the government of Puerto Rico, they had not updated their numbers. So anyway, in August, we learned from researchers at George Washington University who conducted the most comprehensive study on the question to date that the best estimate is 2,975 people dying as a consequence of the storm. A lot of those deaths came after the storm because of being cut off from electricity, food, clean water, all these things, okay? So I just wanted to kind of recap and just bring people up to speed. They consider it the largest blackout in U.S. history. 175 miles per hour winds uprooted much of Puerto Rico's energy infrastructure. More than 80% of the island's power lines were knocked down by the storm, leaving 3.4 million Americans in the dark. Maria triggered mass migration to the U.S. states. People had to leave Puerto Rico. Republicans and Democrats are fighting to win over Puerto Rican voters, and the hurricane revived Puerto Rico's push for statehood. If anything good can come out of this, it would be the move to push the further momentum, using the momentum of this catastrophe to push for Puerto Rican statehood. Like that is something that needs to happen. I'm gonna leave that there. There's more to be said. I mean, FEMA's saying how they've never before had to rebuild an island. I'm not saying it was an easy job. I'm saying the job could have been done much better and more transparent in what was happening, and as far as the deaths and about the electricity and all the issues that people in Puerto Rico faced. So, yeah, folks, we got a lot going on here.